School lockdown, the last day of middle school. This happened back when I was in middle school. Technically, it was actually my last day in middle school. It was late May, and for our last day, our school would do a sort of field day where the whole school would play a bunch of games to celebrate the end of the school year. Now back then, I used to be a pretty active kid, but unfortunately due to a recent concussion, I was unable to participate in any games the whole day. I was pretty disappointed, yeah, though I did bring my DS and quickly opted to just sit inside one of the classrooms and play that. I mean, there wasn't really anything else I could do. Not that the teachers seemed to mind. So there it was, all by myself in the classroom for my science class, playing my DS, all the while the other kids got to play games in the school's gymnasium. It was a weird feeling being in that classroom alone. I don't really know how to explain it. I mean, up until that point, I don't think I'd ever been in a classroom completely alone. Something that needs to be mentioned is that the teachers that weren't watching the kids in the gymnasium were in a room across the hall having meetings. I'd say I was playing on my DS for not even an hour when my English teacher, Miss Allen, rushed up to the classroom's door and closed it from the outside. She didn't say anything to me, so I figured she just wanted to make sure I couldn't hear whatever the teachers were talking about across the hall. Forgetting about it, I went back to playing my DS. A couple minutes later, the classroom's door swung open. I expected to see one of the teachers coming in to check on me, but no. A man I'd never seen before walked into the room and closed the door behind him. The guy had to have at least been in his 50s, and so I just assumed it was some kid's dad. It wasn't unusual for parents to come into the school to bring a student their lunch, so I asked if he was looking for someone. He replied with, "No," in a tone that seemed almost offended that I would even ask that question. Before I could say anything else, the guy started walking towards me. I asked him what he was doing, and that's when he lifted up his shirt, revealing a handgun on his waistband. He followed it up by saying, "Look, kid, I'm gonna need you to come with me or I'm gonna kill you." The guy said it in the most carefree tone I had ever heard, and that, along with the fact that I'd never even seen a gun in person before, instantly overwhelmed me with pure fear. Before I could fully comprehend the danger of the situation I was in, the guy firmly grabbed my wrist and started pulling me towards the classroom door. But before we got into the hallway, the deafening sound of our school's lockdown alarm started going off. This was followed by the guy instantly letting go of my wrist and making a run for it down the hall and through a back exit. I stood there in shock for a second, but ultimately went back inside the classroom. I'm not sure how much time had passed when Miss Allen came back into the room and told me that she didn't want to scare me, but that there had been an intruder inside the building and a lockdown, which now was over, had taken place. I would tell her about the man, and instantly she brought me to a police officer who was already on the premises to explain what I'd experienced. It turns out the man was the whole reason the school went into lockdown in the first place. The man was reported to have been scoping out the school all morning, and when he was seen getting close to the building itself, someone would call the police, which resulted in the lockdown. The guy was later caught and would openly admit that he had been trying to scare kids into getting into his car so he could kidnap them. And this reality still horrifies me to this day. Not a day goes by where I'm not thankful for the school's alarm going off when it did. School lockdown, the 7th period. It was a completely normal, boring school day. I was in 7th period math, and the clock showed 2:45 p.m., which means the school day was nearly done. As it was a Friday and spring break was just around the corner, you could feel everyone getting antsy in their seats. A lot of people had tests and whatnot, whereas my class got to have fun. We had a super laid-back teacher who loved to entertain us as much as possible. We lucked out in that sense. Me and my girlfriend Haley were messing around in the back talking about something that occurred earlier that day when it happened. The alarm for the lockdown went off and the principal came over the loudspeaker. Now for some context, typically a teacher would yell lockdown 3 times if it was a drill. We were always told if it was 4 times, it was not a drill. The reason for this was to hide the fact that we knew someone was in the building with malicious intent. 4 times we heard the word lockdown. Now I've gotten so used to hearing it only 3 times that I paid no attention to how many times lockdown was even said. The teacher did the usual, turning off the lights, closing the door, and ushering us to the back corner of the room where we couldn't be seen from the glass on the door. Our classroom had 2 doors, one at the front and one at the back. In the midst of all the commotion, me and Haley did the one thing you should never do in a lockdown. We snuck out of the class. We were now in the hallway on the 3rd floor. Everything looked so weird. Not a single person in sight other than the 2 of us. A sort of humming noise came from the walls indicating the school had cut all the power. I thought this was weird as I thought it was only a drill. "Hey, why would they cut off the power if it's just a drill?" I asked. This was when we really started to question if it was actually a drill or not. But with us being stupid teenagers, we brushed it off as nothing. We continued roaming the halls when we started to hear a sound. We got really creeped out by this as no one was supposed to be outside the classrooms. We ran into the nearest bathroom to hide. We ran into the 4th stall that was tucked into the corner and hid. We sort of just sat there giggling, thinking we outsmarted the teacher. Maybe about 30 seconds had passed and we started to hear the footsteps again, but this time much closer. My heart froze. I could tell it was right outside the door. At this point, we were sure we'd been caught. We kept as quiet and as still as possible, hoping not to make a sound. It was really weird though. The person outside hadn't come in yet, but they hadn't left either. If they left, we would have clearly heard their footsteps leaving, but we never heard them. Haley pointed this out to me, and that's when we started taking the situation a bit more seriously. The door opened and someone stepped in. I was about to walk out of the stall and apologize for sneaking off when Haley stopped me. She whispered to me, "Isn't it protocol for teachers to ask if there's anyone in the bathroom?" She was right. This wasn't normal teacher behavior, and that's when the heart-dropping realization hit us. Whoever was in the bathroom with us wasn't a teacher. While contemplating what to do, the silence was broken. A voice said, "I know you're in there." My heart dropped as the person said that. The voice was younger and it obviously wasn't a teacher. We were practically crying at this point, unable to hold it back. The guy was now directly in front of the stall door. He started pounding on the door and screaming like a madman. Then I heard the door open again, followed by the familiar voice of my teacher, Mr. Taylor, saying, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I heard a scuffle outside and I immediately rushed to aid my teacher. Eventually, we got the guy held down and the cops were called. Apparently, the man was an escapee from a mental asylum near the school, and thankfully, no one got hurt. School lockdown, the killer clown. I don't know if any of you guys remember a few years ago when a sort of killer clown craze shook America for a few months. Well, this all happened during that time. I always remembered me and my friends thought it was funny, and we'd always watch those clown caught on camera videos that were really popular at lunch. Although our laughter turned into fear when we were made aware that a few of those clowns on Twitter threatened to come to our school at 11 a.m. that day and quote-unquote, kill all of us. Luckily, the school picked up on this and they sent out emails to the parents that they had scheduled a planned lockdown at 10:30 that day in response to the threats. I was sitting in history class when I heard the familiar sound of the lockdown alarm, followed by the teacher rushing to the windows and door, locking and closing them. Even though initially the threat freaked me out, I wasn't worried at this point. I reasoned that it was most likely just another blank threat online, and that nothing would happen. After about 40 minutes of silence sitting on the cold floor in the corner of the room, the emergency green flashing light turned off, then followed by the air conditioning slowly falling silent, and then the hallway lights switched off. The school had cut the power. But why though? At this point, me and my classmates were staring at each other. We all knew that something real was going on, as the school never cut off the power unless something serious was happening. After 10 minutes or so, we could all hear a faint banging noise from down the corridor, shortly followed by heavy and fast footsteps. Someone was running down the hallway. They started banging on the lockers and screaming. At this point, a few girls started quietly crying. Just then, the most terrifying thing ever happened. One of the men dressed as a clown ran up to the class door, banging and screaming. A couple people were crying now, and one of my friends whispered to me in complete seriousness saying, "We're all gonna die." I have no shame in admitting that this caused me to start crying too. I then heard the loud sound of glass shattering. The man had shattered the glass part of the door, and I could see his arm reaching through to try to unlock the door from the inside. I was frozen and in complete disbelief as to what I was witnessing. But luckily, my teacher reacted quickly, grabbing a piece of shattered glass from the ground and stabbing the man's arm before he could unlock the door. He instantly grabbed his arm back and you could hear his screams of pain. He then quickly stepped away from the door and his screams slowly faded down the corridor. After another 2 hours, the principal came on the loudspeaker explaining everything. He said that just after 11, 2 men walked into the school, one holding a kitchen knife. They ran around the school threatening to kill students and trying to break into classrooms. But once the police raided the school, only one of them was caught, and it wasn't the one who tried to break into our classroom. After the whole event, the school got over 20 buses to take the younger kids home, and the kids 9th grade and over like me were told to walk home in groups and call the cops if we saw anything suspicious. I had a hard week at school after that experience. I was always thinking that the men would return, this time with a gun or something, but nothing happened. This nonetheless will be scarred into my mind forever. Ever since the lockdown, the school has hired a few more on-campus police officers, and they've installed some auto-locking features on doors and windows. This has made me feel a little bit better in school, but this isn't just an experience you can simply forget about. School lockdown, the gang threat. I live in the middle of nowhere. The school I go to has maybe 500 students in total. It's enough for everyone to know everyone's name. Regardless, this day our school went on lockdown. That familiar yet eerie chime of our principal's voice saying to remain in our classes until further notice rang through the building over the intercoms. His voice was surprisingly calm, especially considering the fact that he didn't even say it was a drill. Despite our little town, crime isn't completely unheard of. We've had our fair share of reported break-ins, robberies, and even some gang activity. "I bet it's a robber down at Chase Bank," my friend Kyle joked. I laughed and we started talking about what we actually thought the whole lockdown was for. Kyle's voice was beginning to get louder, only interrupted by her teacher Miss Sanders herself shushing him. It had now been about 10 minutes of complete silence, but like most high schoolers tend to, we all lost our patience. Everyone was now talking softly to whoever they were sitting next to at this point. Just then we all heard it. Footsteps. Not just one pair, but a few walking down the hall. We all went quiet, knowing that something was wrong. And if this was a drill, there would have been just one pair of footsteps, being the teacher checking on the classrooms. Even Kyle, who had previously been talking, grew silent. Miss Sanders moved slowly to the doorway, appearing out from behind a corner. The heaviness in the air was suffocating. Just then we heard footsteps again, seemingly doing another lap around the school. A girl across the room let out a muffled sob of fear. I focused my attention on the door. I was leaning out from behind a table to peer through the window to see if I could see anything. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but whatever I was expecting, a whole lot of nothing was not it. The hallway was empty and completely dark, as it tends to be when no one was in it. The lights were all automated in my school, but just then I noticed some of them turn on. A wave of yellow light instantly filled the room as we huddled in, casting shadows against the rows of desks. Someone somewhere tried to calm the crying girl. I could hear their own murmured voice waver. I was still looking through the door's window from a distance at this point, but of course as I was doing this, I saw someone walk up to the window and start looking through into the room. I instantly ducked back down behind the table the whole class was hiding behind. I felt my heart beat wildly as I heard the sound of the doorknob start to shift. My vision grew static as I pulled my knees to my chest, curling up tightly in the corner of the room. The door shook as the guy banged on it repeatedly. And as he was doing this, my biggest fear came true. The door hinges gave out and this guy proceeded to walk into the classroom. All of us went silent, praying this man wouldn't walk over to the corner of the room and see all of us hiding behind this table. About a minute passed of just this guy standing there, and we could hear someone else sprinting to the door, followed by the words, "Dude, we gotta go. The cops are already here." That's when I heard the guy start running out of the room and down the hall. The cops came, and a little later that was it. The guys who entered the school were never caught, and apparently they were armed with guns. The story goes that one of the kids at my school tweeted at a gang, essentially making fun of them the night before that school day. And of course, the gang took it very seriously and planned on raiding the school and killing the kid responsible. Luckily, they weren't successful. This experience still terrifies me nonetheless. The soccer coach. I went to middle school in a private school where the middle and high school was comprised of only 30 students. One of the assistant coaches from my middle school team was a soft-spoken man that volunteered for many of our school functions. I assume this is due to the fact that he had 2 adopted sons that attended my school. One was a grade older, and one was a couple of grades below me. I didn't really remember him at all until I graduated high school and out of the blue got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Still, don't know how he got my number. It turns out to be that this man was wishing me a happy graduation. I at first thought that he was just friendly, but then he called back insisting on taking me for a steak dinner. I tried to politely decline, but he began texting me and calling me nonstop. This made me really uncomfortable, and so I sternly requested he leave me be. A couple of years later, I am a sophomore in college and I received this email. "Dear me, I shall try one last time, though not to bother, but to seek a friendship that I can feel can work and benefit us both. It seems that most people will pass through their lives and leave a vacant mark, soon to be forgotten, or have thought of just a passing blip that does not linger. However, then there are those who leave their mark as if to say, I am somebody of value, I want to make a difference. I'm not sure where or how I so tragically messed up in trying to recapture a friendship that I felt important, not wanting anything more or anything less but a friendship of value and a meaning that would be of importance to 2 lives. Long ago, as a soccer coach, there was a young man of intrigue on my team. His intelligence shone through his skills on the soccer field, and there was something there, something that sparked the thought of value. It was difficult to define, harder still to understand. Nonetheless, that young man left a mark that would stay in the portals of my mind. Typically, society does not take kindly to a grown married man taking up a friendship with a young man with a family of his own, innocence of course, respectfully even more, but still looked at with this inevitable stink eye. Maybe one day the paths of this coach and team member will cross again. Most of the friendships that I value in my life have come along in the most unusual way. For instance, the 19-year-old female classmate at mortuary school that just seemed to fit under my wing. I was the one that was not interested in hitting on her, just establishing a friendship that could last for years to come. Perhaps the 93-year-old lady in the nursing home who was hungry for the company of someone that enjoyed listening to her stories of times gone by. The 7-year-old author from Casey County that immediately gave a feeling of commonality that was uncovered after just a few dinners and glasses of Merlot. A young friend of a son who, lacking a father figure, just wanted respect from a generation that was not willing to give it. I could go on and on. I have found that the old saying that you can't pick your family, however you can pick your friends, is of tremendous value in my life. Souls are waiting around every corner in the most bizarre places, but when you encounter them, the rewards are endless. What does all this mean for you? Perhaps nothing, or maybe just maybe something. This is for you to decide. Nature may have already taken its course, but I try not to give up on anything that I consider of value in my life for the lives of others. Best regards, him. I responded extremely curtly and notified this man that I forwarded the email to my father, attorney at law. I don't like to speculate, but considering the nature of the adoption, the demeanor and behavior of the sons growing up, as well as their age of proximity to me, I really worry about their upbringing. Never heard from this man since, but my younger sister said one of her male friends has had similar interactions with him. To add to the creepiness, this man is a mortician in my county. I would like to add a bit more context to this story. I would receive multiple voicemails a day of this man telling me things like, "I want to take you out to a big steak dinner, anything you want. We can even share some wine at my house before." Or, "I don't know what I'm doing wrong and why you were pushing me away. I think we can truly get along great." I agreed at first. I thought this man was simply reaching out to me in a friendly manner, but the persistence after being nicely turned down is what raised red flags. After starting college, I received a new phone number as well as new email address. Not for this reason, but because I got my own phone plan and started university with a new email. My second year here, he tracked down both informations again. This is when he sent this letter as well as started the calls again. It was only after telling the man that I forwarded his email to my father, who happened to be an attorney, that he left me alone. Few months later, the county prosecutor contacted me requesting information. When I recalled this story, I did a quick Google search of his email and name, and found at least 2 obituaries of 14 and 15-year-old boys that live in different states from him, where he posts on the online funeral page expressing condolences. I won't add his exact wording or the sites because I don't want to reveal his identity, but both were identical and went something like this. "Parents, may God give you strength. I feel like I have gotten to know your son through the Facebook posts and messages we have shared and have grown to love him and have plenty of respect for him. My heart is aching. I love you, insert son's name." It is speculative, but it sounds as if he doesn't personally know these boys, and the similar wording he uses to the letter he sent me for sure raises red flags. And lastly, I want to reiterate that I barely knew this man. We never had an opportunity to be alone and develop some bond that he refers to. He was the assistant coach from my middle school soccer team. I rarely even made it on the field as I was in the 6th grade and it was a middle school team. It was not as if he was some teacher I saw every day, and I sincerely left an impression on him and didn't even remember he existed until the calls and emails started. The 911 dispatcher, Ashlyn Jane Doe. Years. 11 long years of receiving the calls of everyone from entitled do-gooders to terrified pleading victims of serious violent crimes. I spent a long time compartmentalizing the more harrowing calls. Years letting go of the pain and suffering I soaked up like a sponge during the years I spent sat in front of the switchboard computer. I've had numerous sleepless nights, countless visits to state-appointed therapists, but only one emergency call really sticks with me. One that I could never shake off or push to the back of my mind. I have a copy of the transcripts to the call, so I'll be referencing my copy to ensure my recollection of the events are as accurate as possible. This is the story of the Ashlyn Jane Doe. Working in more than 6,000 call centers nationwide, 911 dispatchers form the vital link between callers in distress and emergency response teams that assist them. Through efficient handling and assessment, we reduce response times and help save lives. That's the idea that got me into the career in the first place. Saving lives. I never been particularly athletic, so a career in law enforcement or the military was never really in the cards for me. That always bothered me. I grew up intensely idealistic, and I've always had my heart set on a career where I could help people, help make the world a better place. So when I found out that I could apply to be a 911 dispatcher and help play a part of such a vital public service, I jumped at the chance. We were told that the job wasn't for everyone, that it could take a serious psychological toll on those that volunteered. I know it sounds crazy, but that only made it more appealing. It was after all public service, service being the operative word. It would be rough, frustrating, even depressing sometimes, but I would be providing a much-needed aid to my fellow Americans, often during the darkest, most terrifying moments of their lives. I should also add that it requires specialist training to be a police dispatcher. Being a general call taker or even an emergency medical service dispatcher is a tough gig. But a police dispatcher was a cut above, and we all knew it. Only the most intelligent, strong-willed, and decisive candidates are granted roles as police dispatchers. So naturally, I was over the moon when I passed the applicant's exam and was given a place on the training course. I was a pretty experienced member of the police dispatchers when the call from Ashland Jane Doe came through just a few hours into my shift. I recently returned from the break room with a flask of strong black coffee to fuel me throughout the night. I always seem to say a little prayer whenever a call is patched through, hoping it's nothing too serious, nothing too upsetting. But as soon as I heard the girl's voice, I knew it would be bad. You see, screamers are bad. You can barely hear them, they're incoherent, and basically you have to spend like the first 5 minutes of the call just getting them to breathe enough to communicate. But the worst by far are the whisperers. The whisperers call when whatever is putting them in danger is close, real close. Whisperers call because they're being hunted. 911, what is the address of your emergency? I asked. The call had already been picked up by a general call taker and patched through to me once it was established that the caller needed the police. She whispered, across from the 4th Street laundromat. There was a slight pause before the girl whispered the fact that she didn't know exactly where she was gave me a terrible sinking feeling. This is going to be a rough one. What's the problem? I replied, trying to sound as casual as possible. Younger callers seem to respond better that way, she said. I've been abducted. The way she sounded so calm, so matter-of-fact, it was utterly chilling. There was no hope in the girl's voice, even though she was so close to a rescue. But you're at the laundromat, I asked, consulting a map of the area. It was right in the middle of Ashland, surrounded by a commercial and residential district. She wasn't held up in some barn in the middle of nowhere. Despite being thoroughly disturbed, I reassured myself with the thought that this would be an easy rescue. No, she whispered. Bedroom with him. The words seemed to rattle around in my skull. She was in the bedroom with him. Do you know what color the house is? I tried to change the subject slightly to garner more information, sure, but also to try to keep the girl calm, keep her mind occupied. No, was all she said. This was a spanner in the works, a big one. The police can't just go kicking in the door of every apartment or house opposite the 4th Street laundromat. Yet before I could press her for more detail, she spoke again. Please hurry. My heart rate began to pick up at this point. She was obviously in danger, perhaps extreme danger. I had to remain professional and continue my assessment of the situation. Does he have a weapon? I asked, already preparing to send out an APB to muster the officers required for a rescue. She said, got a taser. She lowered her voice even further as she spoke, but still she didn't seem overwhelmed by fright. I considered for a moment that whoever may have drugged the poor girl to keep her sedated. Are you injured? I asked. A little, she whispered. Her whisper was haunting by that point. She sounded like she'd been driven half insane by the ordeal. Is there any way you can get out of the building? I asked. She replied, I don't know without waking him, I'm scared. She was broken by fear, numb with it. Is there a bathroom in the house? I remember my voice breaking. I was so scared for this poor little thing. I wanted so badly for her to just drop the phone and run for her life. She said, his bedroom is closing. He made it so it would make noise. Will he do something to you? I'd never been so intense, not during my entire time as a dispatcher. She said, yeah, he had me tied up. Are you tied up now? I asked. I kind of freed myself, she said. That's my girl, I remember thinking. She was a fighter, a survivor. Oh, she suddenly said. I think I woke him up. I said, just set the phone down. My heart was in my mouth. There was silence. What seemed like minutes of uninterrupted silence as I expected the screams to commence. Finally, I brought myself to say something, anything, down the silent phone line. Are you still there? She asked. How much longer? It broke my heart. I didn't know. I just didn't know. I kept her on the line as I immediately dispatched officers to the laundromat. Luckily, there were only 2 houses immediately opposite the place in what was otherwise an industrial complex. I can't tell you how relieved I was when I finally heard the voices of the dispatch officers. They broke into the house of the kidnapper and were in the process of freeing the poor girl from captivity. I heard one of them bellow, "Show me your hands. Put up your effing hands right now." Do it. I held back tears, knowing that that poor young woman was finally safe from him. She was most definitely in danger too. When the police searched the house, they found the bodies of two other young women that had disappeared in the months before the critical 911 call. Jane Doe is called that because her identity cannot be revealed, standard procedure for all victims of assault. Her abductor, Sean Michael Great, was found guilty of murdering Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith and was later sentenced to death for his crimes. During the trial, he stated that despite having killed before, he had no intention of killing the kidnapped Jane Doe and was in fact intending to marry her. That's what really gets to me. The thought of the brutal, potentially short life that poor girl would have ended up living as the unwilling bride of such a murderous, unfeeling psychopath. Where she would be if she hadn't loosened her bindings, found the phone, and called in her own rescue on that fateful spring night. Halloween night. Ask a cop which day of the year they dread working the most. One or two might answer Christmas or Super Bowl Sunday, and I get that. But 9 out of 10 will give you the same tired look before uttering one single word. Halloween. Might just be some light-hearted spooky fun for some, but for law enforcement it's no joke. The small New England town I serve in has a spike of about 6 or 7 times the number of emergency calls on Halloween night alone. It really does bring out the absolute worst in people. I mean, there's the stuff we anticipate every year. Generous houses having suffered a barrage of weaponized eggs, trees covered in toilet paper, homeowners complaining of juvenile trespassers. Those calls are manageable, but they bog down our on-duty officers so that when serious crimes happen, we're dangerously under strength. But all of the dumb Halloween mischief I've had to respond to over the years, all of it, pales in comparison to what I found at the house on the end of Jefferson Street. That was a Halloween night I don't think I'll ever forget. I just responded to a call regarding a group of teenagers who had apparently been engaging in some pretty aggressive trick-or-treating, all without costumes. That type of stuff is exactly why I hate Halloween. Now, what they were doing wasn't strictly illegal, but I can't exactly have a bunch of knuckle-draggers making trouble on a night like that, especially not with the hundreds of excited children roaming the streets. I lectured them. They rolled their eyes. But I joined the force to get into car chases with bad guys, not argue semantics with a bunch of stone brats. They walked away muttering stuff that I chose to ignore while I got back in my patrol car. The radio almost immediately buzzes to life. My dispatcher says something over the radio involving this rundown house over on Jefferson Street. I start the car up, listening as he describes a member of the public calling to report that the house has Halloween decorations that were too scary. She then says it's the second call that day and I should go over and check it out if I have a minute to spare. She always did have a sense of humor. She knew well I was off my feet. We had a little laugh about it. Like I said, we get some seriously ridiculous calls on Halloween. It's not just dumb kids. It's bitter old misers and party poopers who honestly just resent people having a good time. This one good Christian lady calls us every year over trespassing trick-or-treaters, kids who calls the cops on actual children anyway. I carried about my duties, responding to calls and generally keeping an eye out for trouble. A few hours slipped by. The sun set. The smaller kids led by their parents disappeared back into their homes until it was just a few older groups on their way to parties and whatnot. Then the dispatcher got onto me about this house on Jefferson. She said she had 3 more calls about the decorations, how they're scaring kids and even some parents, and she needs me to roll over there to check it out. Great. Arguing with some slasher movie obsessed hermit who's probably about to get all sovereign citizen on me. Just what I need to make me feel like a guardian of the innocent. Sometimes I feel like the world's grumpy stepfather, honestly. So I took the ride over there to this smaller part of town that's a little more run down. Arriving on Jefferson, I saw the house immediately. That was absolutely no missing it. The old colonial-looking place was covered in Halloween decorations. Cardboard standees of vampires and zombies, a ton of fake cobwebs all over the porch. I think I counted like 20 carved pumpkins dotted all over the lawn, pretty intricate designs too. The thing hanging from a large oak just to the side of the house was the most disturbing Halloween decoration I'd ever seen. Not disturbing because it looked real. The limbs of the figure were too rigid, the hair a little too artificial. But the placement of the thing, it really did set me on edge as I stared out of the patrol car at it. The figure hung by a rope from one of the oak tree's long, thick branches, drifting gently in the fall breeze. Look, I'm a cop. I've seen some stuff. I don't frighten easily. I'm very logical, very level-headed. But that thing sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped out of the car, keeping my eyes glued to the hanging decoration as I walked towards it. The sound of crunching leaves under my feet with each and every step. Reaching for the flashlight on my belt, I pointed the torch beam over towards the tree. I could see why people had called this in. The texture on the thing's skin, it was very graphic, blotchy and purple, almost like an actual corpse. I only took another few steps before I felt extremely foolish from my previous thought. And the smell, the sickly sweet smell of death hung in the air along with what I thought was just a cheeky decoration. It wasn't. It was an actual corpse that had been hanging there all day. Hundreds of kids must have walked past there, only a few of them actually recognizing that the thing hanging from the tree was a real cadaver. I felt sick. Sprinting back to my patrol car, I radioed into dispatch to get the coroner out to Jefferson Street as soon as possible. My dispatcher was absolutely horrified when she learned what I had, that other people had been staring at a dead body all day, many of them none the wiser. The hangman was a one Richard Dodd, a retired teacher who was reported to have been caught up in some vigilante pedo sting. According to investigating officers, Mr. Dodd had been tricked into revealing questionable interest to individuals that were posing as an underage girl. When they threatened to go public with some of the more despicable things he said online, Mr. Dodd had opted for the easy way out, systematically fashioning a rope and doing the deed all without a thought for whom might happen across his body. People give me a hard time for not being into Halloween as a holiday, for rolling my eyes when grown adults talk about how wasted they're going to get or what costume they have picked out. What if they knew the things that went on around them on that grisly night, things that are sometimes hiding in plain sight? I don't think they'd be so quick to celebrate. The fake cops. So I'm pretty sure there are identical services in America, but over here in England, you can get your supermarket of choice to deliver your shopping or groceries directly to your home after you make your order. Some hard-working, handsome, diligent driver person will load your food into a van, drive it out to you, and personally deliver them with a smile. And if you're lucky enough to live in Nottingham, then that handsome driver person might well be me. Since the whole pandemic thing started, the number of people using Asda's delivery services shot up. In the run-up to Christmas, I worked 8 days straight from 7 in the morning to 8 in the evening with hardly any kind of break to keep me sane. It was exhausting, completely and utterly exhausting. And that's the insane level of fatigue I was feeling that takes the blame for the story I have for you today. So as I'm making quite a large delivery one night and the roads are pretty quiet, I see blue flashing lights in my rearview mirror. I give it a few seconds and the lights are still behind me, so obviously I pull over to the side of the road to await further instructions. It's about then that I realize that it's not a normal-looking police car. It's unmarked, just this plain-looking Renault Clio. And the guy that got out of the driver's side was wearing just regular civilian clothes. I lower my window to see the guy flashing a badge and an ID at me, but he's wearing a face mask for COVID, so it's not like I can see who it actually is anyway. But when the guy says drug squad and asks for my driver's license, I obviously comply. Undercover police are a thing after all, and a city like Nottingham has a lot of drug crimes, so I didn't think anything of the guy being in his own clothes. The guy runs a check on my ID, then explains that a big drug gang has been using professional couriers to ferry product around, that he and his partner might need to search my rear storage. Obviously, I tell them I'll do anything I can to help. So I mask up, get out of the cab, and open up the rear storage of my van so the police can look around. As soon as the rear doors are open, I notice that the plainclothes officer who climbs into the back is being really rough with some of the produce. I don't say anything at first. I mean, I wouldn't dare start lecturing a policeman on how to do his job, especially when they were hot on the tail of some drug gang and seemed pretty agitated about it. His partner then asked me if he can search the cab in my van, so I open it up for him and he too starts rummaging around the glove box and stuff, being just as rough and inconsiderate as the officer in the back. Again, I'm quite annoyed by this, and I wander around the back of the van to see how things are getting on, only to find the officer searching back there is in the process of basically ransacking the contents. He's shoving things off shelves, tossing fragile items out the back door. It was outrageous behavior. I finally find it in me to speak up and ask the officer in quite a loud but polite tone to please not be so rough with the produce. "Shut your mouth," was all he said in reply, without skipping a beat too. It was such a rude response that it was actually a little bit dumbstruck for a second. I dealt with some impatient police officers before, but this was something else entirely. I tell him there's no need for that kind of attitude as I am being perfectly cooperative. But by that point, his colleague has joined me after searching the cab and decides to play the good side of this good cop, bad cop routine. He apologizes for the inconvenience, assures me of the importance of their work, and then says that he has to search me too since I might be hiding something on me. By then I was already late for my scheduled delivery, so that ship had sailed. So I figured I might as well just be a good little citizen and continue to help the police as much as I could. So then right there, parked up on a dark, deserted street, this masked-up officer starts frisking my pants and jacket for anything I shouldn't have on me. It was just like a routine stop and search at first, nothing out of the ordinary. But then the bloke asked me to take off my jacket so he can search it more thoroughly. Bear in mind it's absolutely freezing out, so I'm not best pleased, but I still comply. He pats it down a bit, tosses it to the side, then tells me to take off my shoes. I shoot him this confused look and he starts telling me how I could easily hide drugs or money inside my footwear. I'm coming to the end of my tether, but I do as I'm told. And that's when it all goes downhill. The police officer has my shoes in his hands. He walks around the back of me and starts putting me in cuffs. He tries to assure me that I'm just being detained and I'll be uncuffed once the search is completed. But this explanation does nothing for my nerves. I feel trapped. I'm starting to panic and I'm starting to realize that something is horribly wrong with this whole encounter. I'm freezing. I got no shoes on. This police officer is leaning me back towards the van and I'm just on the verge of kicking off. Then right as I say something about getting their badge numbers to make a complaint, the officer escorted me back towards the van, shoves me to the ground and says something like, "Will you bollocks, mate?" I couldn't believe what was happening. Or maybe it was just that I didn't want to believe what was happening, because as I get dragged back to my feet by an officer who has suddenly lost all airs of professionalism, it dawns on me that these two policemen aren't exactly who they say they are. And that's when the raw fear kicked in. Like I said, I'm handcuffed, freezing, and shoeless, completely at these blokes' mercy. And to make matters worse, they start asking me questions that they're not liking the answers to. They start asking me where the money is, and I don't realize what they're asking for at first, as if they still thought I was some kind of drug courier or something to that effect. I'm telling them that I don't know what they're talking about, that it's all online these days and there's no cash in the van. They responded by throwing me into the refrigerated rear storage unit, threatening to lock the doors behind them. Most delivery drivers who have these kinds of cold storage have the means to unlock the door should they ever get trapped inside. But I'm handcuffed, and my jacket with the keys in it is just lying at the side of the road. If they'd shut the doors on me, I might not be around to tell this story. I beg them not to shut the doors, and I know how pathetic I must have sounded, because they just responded by bursting out laughing at me, mimicking my pleading in a horrifying display of cruelty and viciousness. They responded by pulling me out of the unit, me hitting the tarmac so hard I think I dislocated my shoulder, before absolutely kicking the life out of me as I was laying there groaning. It was hands down the most terrifying few minutes of my life. And now that I look back on it, I think that's exactly what they wanted. I mean, why rob a bloody supermarket delivery truck? I'm not exactly an armored bank car, am I? They weren't stupid blokes either. The one I spoke to the most had this way about him. Really made me think he was a legit policeman, you know. So why target me? Simple. Because they knew I could be easily intimidated. I was a soft target, one that they could just toy with to get their rocks off. They could just pull over some bloke in a Beamer, take all his cash, or maybe an electrical truck or something if they wanted to make some money. But me, I wasn't worth it. I was pleasure. They did what they did that evening because it was fun for them. And honestly, that's what scares me the most. DoorDash attack. The creation of apps like Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Postmates marked the dawn of a new age in food delivery services. 10 years ago, pink-eyed teenagers everywhere envisioned a day when they could get McDonald's delivered to their smoky apartment doors. It now, what was nothing more than a Munchies-induced fantasy, has become a concrete reality, creating new means of employment as well as satisfying appetites all over the country. For one of these newly employed delivery drivers, Sonia Kang, a DoorDash driver's account gave her the ability to plan her work around her busy home life. She could log on during a public holiday, Cinco de Mayo for example, and watch the cash roll in as she delivered tacos, burritos, and enchiladas all over the city of Atlanta, Georgia. But little did Sonia know that the first job of the day would be her last, and would involve a brush with death that left her shaken and traumatized. The 31-year-old mother of 4 was making a routine delivery at the time of the incident, and hadn't previously encountered any kind of trouble while she was on the job. But on that particular occasion, she got out of her car, grabbed the food delivery from her passenger seat, only to find herself face to face with a man by the name of Rick Painter. Sonia said that at first, Rick seemed like a perfectly normal guy. He had requested the food delivery be dropped off on a counter inside of his house, which wasn't an unusual request. So Sonia had no problem in hearing, till some disabled customers have special requests they make of delivery drivers who are often only too happy to accommodate them. Besides, the house looked perfectly well-maintained and non-threatening, and as Sonia later put it, anyone would have gone inside. But when she entered the house and it came to Rick giving her a tip, Sonia found that her customer was anything but normal. As Rick thanked Sonia for dropping the food off and pulled out a $5 bill from his wallet, he looked her up and said, "Oh, by the way, I'm Jesus." Sonia was thrown off guard by this bizarre comment, and it took a moment for it to register that it was what he actually said. But when the penny dropped that this apparently perfectly normal guy was comparing himself to a prophet, Sonia began to get nervous. She says Rick then shot her a look that gave away how horribly unhinged he was, a kind of predatory smile that sent shivers down her spine, and she knew it was time for her to leave. Only Rick wasn't about to let her leave, as he had other things in mind for her. At this point, it's important to note that Sonia is a practicing Muslim and wears the full face covering more commonly known as a niqab. Whether or not it was the visual cue to set Rick off and made him allude to himself as Jesus, we can't possibly speculate. But the fact of the matter is that when Rick decided to attack the terrified Sonia, he chose to do so in the most disrespectful way possible. He pulled her niqab from her head, wrapped it around her throat, and began choking her with it. He then grabbed Sonia by the hair and tried to use his grip to apply even more force to her throat. "He's grabbing me and trying to choke me with my own niqab. I kept telling the man I've got kids. In the midst of me fighting him, he's grabbing my head," Sonia later said. "He thought he was Jesus, but Jesus wouldn't do that to nobody. I was just rolling around and trying to pry off certain fingers, but he would not let my hair go. I stuck my finger in his eye. He would not let my hair go. It was definitely about to be a murder, and it was going to be me." As Sonia fought for her life, she found she was able to get a grip of her car keys and began using them to jab them into Rick Painter's face over and over again. "I didn't want to stab anybody," she insisted, "but But I had to do it because I kept seeing my kids flashing before my eyes, and I kept seeing my husband and thinking I gotta get out of this house so I can go home to my family. Time and time again, the sharp ends of Sonia's car keys ripped into Rick's flesh. And his mugshot photo shows him with some seriously horrifying injuries, all inflicted by Sonia. They look incredibly painful and must have been agony to endure at the time of the attack. But disturbingly, Rick seemed to react in a completely different way to what we might expect. Instead of yelling or growling in pain as he was being repeatedly stabbed in the face, Rick began to make noises that turned Sonia's blood to ice. It sounded like he was enjoying it, like the pain was doing less than wholesome things for him. Rick let out a long, slow groan before mumbling, "Ah, this feels good." Somehow, Sonia managed to pry a couple of Rick's fingers free from her hair before slipping out from her niqab in a way that allowed her a window of escape. She bolted back to her car, gunned the engine, and drove away from her unexpected brush with death as quickly as she could. It's almost a miracle that she was able to do so with nothing but cuts and bruises. And if her attacker had put a little more planning and precision into the ambush, there's only a slim chance Sonia would have walked out alive. Not long after the attack, Rick Painter was arrested by the Atlanta Police Department, and his detention kicked off legal proceedings that ended in him being given a 2-year prison sentence on charges of false imprisonment and misdemeanor battery. Sonia might have gotten some small measure of justice from the attack, but knowing Rick will be back on the streets in just 2 years is something that terrifies her. "I've become very distant with a lot of people that I love now. I don't trust people. I expect the worst to happen," she said. The scary thing is the harrowing experience that Sonia endured isn't all that rare, as attacks on food delivery drivers have been steadily rising over the past 5 years or so. Delivery drivers in London are finding that their distinctive Uber Eats branded bags and waterproofs are making them a target for robberies. In several violent instances, drivers were knocked off their bikes or mopeds either by flying kicks or by being hit by a car before a gang descends on them to relieve the injured party of their valuables. The scale of the problem is hard to assess because police forces don't yet gather statistics on it, and the companies themselves don't publish any. Sonia Kang personally thinks that DoorDash should do more to protect its 400,000 couriers, such as background checks to identify customers with criminal records. Rick Painter had been in and out of prison for other violent offenses, and Sonia says that if she'd known that, she wouldn't have been so quick to take the job. She also complains that after the attack, she wasn't able to speak to anyone from the San Francisco company. She could only email them, and that it was 3 days before anyone actually called to check on her. "I almost died, and this is the way they treat me," she added. "It was just disgusting." DoorDash says it sincerely regrets the handling of Sonia's case, that they take the safety of their drivers extremely seriously, and do not tolerate any form of harassment or inappropriate behavior. DoorDash added that it has now introduced a free occupational accident insurance policy for all of its U.S. drivers. But for some, the move is too little too late. But despite all we do to ensure the safety and security of our fellow man, what we can't prevent is certain individuals' desire to hunt and hurt perfectly innocent people, who abuse the ever-growing service economy to prey on those desperate to make a living. People like that will always find a way to slip through the net, and the horrifying fact is that no matter what we do, we will never be completely safe, no matter where we are or what we're doing. The pizza delivery murder. So I had this part-time job when I was in high school working as a pizza delivery driver for a large pizza chain. I saw some pretty wild stuff on the job, but only one thing that actually seriously creeped me out. I'm making this routine delivery to some innocuous-looking house, but when the guy answers the door, he just sort of grabs the pizza, throws a fistful of ones in my face, then slams the door behind him. At first I'm just like, rude. But then when I count the money, I find that not only has this guy not given me enough for his 20-inch meat lovers, but he's not even bothered to tip me. I'd been burned once or twice before when it came to my account, and the difference ended up coming out of my wages, so I was not about to let that nonsense happen a third time. I ended up banging on the guy's door for like a solid 5 minutes before he answered. Like I could see him moving around behind the frosted glass panel but totally ignoring my knocking. In the end, I lose my temper and say something like, "Hey man, don't try and finesse me out of money. I don't want to have to call the cops, but I will." Boom, those were the magic words. He comes right up to the front door and opens it up, not all the way, maybe a third of the way open. This guy is saying sorry a whole lot, like almost too much. He's all pale, he's sweating. His hands are shaking as he passes me a 20, just laying on the sorry the whole time. I'm just thinking, what's this guy's problem? But then I catch a glimpse of something in the hallway behind the guy, and suddenly I've got a good idea what the guy's deal was. There's a dark red stain on the wooden floor, maybe the size of a manhole cover, and next to it are what look like all kinds of different cleaning products. I take one quick look at that, then at the guy, and he just slams the door on my face. I'm back in my car and speeding back to the pizza place faster than you can say F that. As soon as I get there, I call the cops. As it turned out, I had legit interrupted this guy cleaning up a murder. And from what I heard, the guy was having an affair with a high school girl that was like 30 years his junior. She's over at his place while his wife is out of town, orders pizza at some point. Then before it even arrives, the guy kills her because she's threatening to ruin his marriage or something. He had no clue that she'd ordered the pie, panics when I show up at the door, and that's how he got caught. Crazy story, right? But for me, the craziest part isn't so much the whole murderous infidelity thing. It's that before she was murdered, this girl unwittingly kicked off a chain of events that would catch her own killer. I had to go to court a bunch of times too, since I was basically the case's star witness. And it was so freaky seeing that guy looking at me when I talked to the prosecutor. He literally killed a girl with his own hands, and there, he was giving me death stares. Like I said, I've seen some wild stuff working pizza delivery, but only one thing that gave me nightmares: that guy's eyes. Dennis Martin. In June of 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin accompanied his family on a camping trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a mountain range rising along the Tennessee-North Carolina border in the southeastern United States. The name Great Smoky Mountains comes from the natural fog that often hangs over the range, appearing as large smoke plumes from a distance. Interestingly, this fog is caused by chemicals emitted from the local flora, chemicals that have a high vapor pressure and easily form vapors at normal temperatures and pressures. Yet even having heard the scientific explanation behind the phenomenon, seeing all that fog clinging to the hilltops is a very eerie sight indeed. Hailing from nearby Knoxville, Tennessee, the Martin family had a long-running tradition of celebrating Father's Day by taking camping trips to the Great Smoky Mountains. In 1969 would mark young Dennis's first trip into the woods in the company of his father, older brother, and grandpa. The group drove out to Cad's Cove, an isolated valley located in the Tennessee section of the park, then hiked out towards Russell Field, where they set up camping and began preparing for the first night under the stars. The following morning, they set off for a place known as Spence Field, a picturesque highland meadow and popular camping spot which was bisected by the rolling hills and jagged mountain peaks of the Appalachian Trail. When the group arrived at Spence Field, Dennis and his older brothers set off to explore the campsite and reportedly talked to many of the other campers who would pitch their tents nearby. This is how they got talking to a ragtag group made up of other campers' children, who made fast friends with the Martin boys. Dennis's father was pleased to see his son getting along so well with the other kids, and having his sons occupied meant the adults could get on with the important task of assembling their 4-man tent. Once the task was completed, Dennis was still playing with the group of other kids, and his father said he watched as the group gleefully took up hiding positions from which to playfully ambush a group of approaching adults. When the grown-ups entered the kids' make-believe kill zone, they all jumped out, growling and roaring like wild animals as they set upon their laughing parents. All but one, all but little Dennis. His father watched with growing concern as the seconds ticked by, and Dennis had yet to emerge from his hiding spot. Eventually, he couldn't bear it anymore, and after rising from his camping chair, Dennis's father marched off to the spot where he had last seen his 6-year-old son and began calling out his name. But what started out as stern fatherly commands soon degenerated into terrified pleas, and as he continued to call out in desperation, the other families began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Once Dennis's grandpa knew he was missing, he set the group into action, sending one group 2 miles up the Appalachian Trail with his son, while he led another group back towards the Cad's Cove Ranger Station, arriving there around 8:30 p.m. that night. Thus began an extensive, well-publicized search and rescue operation in which National Park Service personnel was supplemented by National Guard soldiers and even units of Green Berets. At the peak of the search operation, more than 1,400 people were operating in the few square miles around Spence Field, but not a single one found anything that could lead them to the missing boy. However, in the aftermath of the operation, the search efforts drew a great deal of criticism from search and rescue experts far and wide, who said the large number of personnel involved potentially obscured tracks on ground that was already difficult to track due to heavy rain. Shockingly, a shoe print belonging to that of a child was actually found at one point, but the track was dismissed as belonging to one of the Boy Scouts that was helping with the search. Later, however, investigators kicked themselves when they found that the tracks were determined to have come from a child who was missing one shoe, which disappeared on the banks of a stream, some suggesting it was possible that the tracks belonged to Martin. This theory was supported when a discarded child-sized shoe and sock were found just 3 days later. Although search and rescue personnel continued their search for more than 2 weeks, scouring the hillsides night and day in continual shifts, no further clues to Martin's whereabouts were ever found. The Martin family was understandably desperate for answers and offered a $5,000 reward for any information that would reunite them with their beloved Dennis. This got the attention of a handful of so-called psychics, who some might argue sought to exploit the Martin family's grief, hopping to cash in if they guessed the right area of the Smokies to search. Surprisingly, none of these psychics ever proved to be of any help. Many years later, in 1985, a man who had apparently been illegally collecting American ginseng in the park claimed to have come across the skeletal remains of a child while exploring the woods. The man said he should have reported the find, but was terrified of being prosecuted for his prohibited herbal hobby. Not only that, but he was also unable to point investigators in the direction of the site he'd found the bones in the first place. There have been many theories that have attempted to explain what happened to young Dennis Martin that day. Most detectives, both amateur and professional, believe that Dennis became disoriented whilst looking for a hiding place, maybe even forgetting his way back to camp when he emerged from it. Either way, Dennis then strayed further from the camp and could easily have fallen down one of the many steep slopes and ravines that dotted the area surrounding Spence Field. However, Dennis was wearing a bright red t-shirt when he went missing, not something that would be easy for search and rescue teams to miss. Dennis would have to be completely covered in foliage to remain undetected with that color of shirt, and despite it being feasible due to his small size, the likelihood of that is extremely low. Others are quick to remind us of the presence of black bears in the area, as well as copperhead vipers and feral pigs, all of which would have posed a considerable threat to 6-year-old Martin. Park rangers told investigating police that an underweight bear had been caught in a boar trap in the Spence Field area just 2 weeks earlier. Although the bear was released safely, the incident suggested that it may have been struggling to find enough food, prompting it to turn to a less familiar source of food. However tragic and brutal the aforementioned theories are, Dennis's father believes something considerably more sinister. Based on the eyewitness account of one Harold Key, who says he heard a loud scream on the very same afternoon that Dennis disappeared. Dennis's dad firmly believed that his son was kidnapped by an opportunistic predator. Shortly after he heard the scream, Harold Key claimed to have seen a disheveled, bearded man with wild, unkempt hair fleeing through the woods in an apparent bid to remain undetected by the nearby campers. Harold's family went on to explain that they saw a flash of red on the figure's shoulders, which some believe was actually Dennis himself slung over the shoulder of this mysterious figure as they carried him away. Harold later speculated that the man may have been a moonshiner, explaining his reluctance to be seen. Despite the report, FBI investigators ultimately dismissed it, saying that as much as Harold meant well, his account was frankly unreliable as his timeline of events were off. But one retired park ranger lamented the failure to properly follow up either the footprints or the sighting of the rough-looking man, arguing that as the location of the sighting was downhill from where Dennis disappeared, it was possible to cover that distance in the time frame even carrying a child, but that the individual in question would have some impressive strength, stealth, and endurance. So if this is the case, who is this hairy mystery man, this bearded vagrant who is apparently capable of such an impressive physical feat, even if it was in the context of the despicable abduction of a child? Given the lack of investigation into his sighting or his tracks, it seems we might never know. But even if we did get to the bottom of the mystery of a man living in the Appalachian Mountains with a penchant for kidnapping children, I don't think the answers would bring us any solace. Maybe the closure would be worth it, especially for the family, but nightmares can be a high price to pay, and wondering what happened to young Dennis Martin can give even the most hardened true crime reader some very sleepless nights. Jarred Atadero. Just in 1908 by Theodore Roosevelt, the Big South Trail is an 11-mile hiking route that winds through the rugged Comanche Peak wilderness in Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park. Experienced hikers have described the Big South Trail as of average difficulty, but as one said, there are some areas where the ledges were only 24 inches wide. It can be really tough, and if you're not in shape, it'll take a lot out of you. Known for its picturesque beauty, the trail is also something of a wildlife haven and is home to elk, bobcats, black bears, and mountain lions, just to name a few. While average temperatures on the trail range from highs in the upper 60s in the summer to frigid lows of 10 to 15 degrees in the winter, making it perfect for both sunny and snowy outdoor activities, the area's wild natural beauty is partly what motivated brothers Allen and Ira Atadero to found the Powder River Resort, a place for hikers and outdoorsmen of every variety to indulge in their hobby of choice. Allen mentioned that he and his brothers spent so much time there that they felt that they were becoming part of the landscape itself. So in the end, it just made sense to move their families out there. Life at the resort was relatively carefree until the fall of 1999, when a Christian singles group was helping Allen prepare for winter in exchange for free lodging. On October 2nd, the Christian singles group decided that they wanted to go visit a nearby trout farm, just short of 2 miles from the resort itself. Allen knew several of the singles group well, and since his 6-year-old daughter Jocelyn wanted to join them, Allen knew that there was no way that he could give her permission without her 3-year-old brother Jarred wanting to tag along. So, since he trusted the singles group, Allen gave them permission to take his kids with them on their hike. At about 10 o'clock that morning, excited to be on one of his first real outdoor adventures, Jarred would keep on running ahead of the group, but no more than about 100 feet before his guardians in the singles group would call him back. At around 11:30, the group stopped to talk to some fishermen that their little Boy Scout had run into while on point, and after a brief conversation, they continued on down the trail. By this time, the group had begun to separate or spread out as they walked, some people faster and some slower, with at least one adult with Jarred's sister and Jarred, who continuously ran ahead of everybody else. Shortly afterward, little Jarred rounded a corner on the trail and disappeared from view. Technically, he was no further ahead than he usually was, so his guardians didn't worry too much. But when they too rounded the corner, there was no sign of him and the little beige coat he was wearing. One of the singles group rushed ahead to try to find the boy, but he was nowhere to be found. And as it turned out, that last image of young Jard turning the blind corner on the trail was the last time anyone would see him alive. Over the following few days, a huge search and rescue operation was mounted, but not a single sign of Jard Atadero was found. In fact, it would take almost 4 years for any clues of his demise to be found, but these clues seemed to only raise many more questions than they answered. After searching for approximately an hour, a few members of the hiking group rushed back to the Powder River Resort to give Alan the bad news that his 3-year-old son was lost in the woods. In a panic, Alan immediately drove out to meet the rest of the group, helping them continue to search for another hour or so. It is during this time that some of the 11-person hiking party say that they heard some kind of high-pitched scream, including Alan's 6-year-old daughter Jocelyn. Alan later said, "I asked her what kind of scream it was, like somebody getting attacked or somebody playing with someone. She said it sounded like a playful scream, as if someone was going up to tag him." Since it seemed like Jard was within earshot, the group continued to search intensively for him, but no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't locate their lost toddler. So just before 4 o'clock that afternoon, Alan rushed back to the resort to call 911. Less than 30 minutes later, Larimer County Emergency Service Specialist Bill Nelson received an emergency pager alert informing them that a child had gone missing on the Big South Trail. In turn, Bill contacted his search and rescue manager, who immediately mustered multiple SAR teams to prepare for a large but delicate operation. Within 2 hours of the original 911 call being made, search and rescue personnel had boots on the ground at the lower Big South trailhead, with a total of 65 people involved in the search for Jard. An hour and a half into their search, rescue personnel had scoured the majority of the trail and still hadn't located Jard. As a result, the area of operations was vastly expanded with reinforcements, including Air Force helicopters due to arrive the following morning. At 7 a.m. on October 2nd of 1999, a Cheyenne-based A-1N Huey helicopter made its first pass over the Big South Trail and remained the search and rescue team's eye in the sky until late in the morning. After returning to Fort Collins Loveland Municipal Airport to refuel, the helicopter arrived back in the search area at around 3:30 that afternoon. However, during its second patrol over the trail, the helicopter struggled with the mountain conditions, stalling out and plummeting more than 100 feet before smashing through the pine canopy near the trailhead. Aboard the Huey were 4 USAF servicemen, but also a representative of the Larimer County Search and Rescue Team named Mark Sheets. When it crashed, Mark was the only passenger who was not securely in a seat, as he was on the floor with the door open. He said that when he saw the rotors hit the top of the trees and pieces of helicopter sprayed into the forest, he rushed to close the door, but a severed tree limb found its way into the hold and struck the Air Force doctor on board squarely in the face, fracturing the doctor's eye socket and causing blood to pour from an open wound. By some stroke of good luck, the Air Force crew was able to escape from the helicopter's wreckage, but Mark Sheets had been completely knocked out cold and was still trapped in the mass of crumbled metal that was still in danger of exploding. Nearby search and rescue members ran to the downed helicopter, smashed in a window, and managed to pull the unconscious Sheets out before he could come to any more harm. But he had still received a severe concussion and a 13-inch L-shaped gash that left his femur exposed. Mark also suffered 3 broken vertebrae in his lower back and a broken shoulder, possibly from being pulled from the wreckage so violently. The helicopter crash most definitely set the search back a great deal, but thankfully all survived, and the search efforts continued into their 3rd day. Day 3 saw the arrival of specially trained police diving teams who explored the deep pools of the nearby Powder River. Another helicopter was dispatched to aid the search, but encountered swirling winds that required full power to prevent crashing. This burned through the chopper's fuel supplies in no time, and it was soon forced to return to Fort Collins Air Force Base. Over the next 3 days, well-meaning but ill-equipped volunteers started hounding the Larimer County Sheriff's Office and Larimer County Search and Rescue to allow them to help. 3-year-old Jard had been missing for almost a week at that point, and time was running out to find him safely. They approved, and soon the number of search and rescue personnel had swelled to over 200 and included a dozen dog teams, professional trackers, a dive team, and a search plane. But even with all those bodies and assets, the search and rescue operation was a complete and utter failure, as not a single usable clue to Jard's whereabouts were found. Consequently, officials were forced to notify the Atadero family that the search for Jard had been suspended. Larimer County Undersheriff Bill Nelson hastily convened a press conference, and in it, he told the gathered journalists, "We worked for 8 solid days to begin with, and that was 24 hours a day for 8 days. We did some night searching. It was limited to a certain extent, but we did always have people out in the field to make noise, so if somebody was out there, now Jard would have heard it, he would have maybe responded." Jane Schmievsky, a member of the Larimer County Search and Rescue Canine Unit, said that the search was one of the most intense she'd ever taken part of. She'd never been involved in the search for a child before, and although it was to be expected, she was astounded at the level of media coverage. "It became a real nationwide episode," she said. "So that put a lot of stress on us and a lot of stress on the dogs." County Sheriff Justin Smith was just a lowly sergeant back in 1999 when Jard went missing. He said the helicopter crash was an extremely stressful event, which most definitely had a negative effect at a crucial period of the search, and that the intense media interest only exacerbated the situation. It's worth noting that this all took place right around the time that the grand jury of the John Bennett Ramsey case was due to hand down indictments, so the concept of children coming to harm loomed large in the national zeitgeist. Naturally, the media flocked to sate the public's appetite for answers, and at one point 17 TV satellite trucks lined Colorado's Highway 14, and the area swarmed with reporters and camera crews sporting fur coats to protect them from the bitter Colorado cold. Meanwhile, police information hotlines were buzzing with calls, including a number of self-proclaimed psychics who claimed they knew where SAR operators could find the terrified but still living Jard. TV crews observed a Native American medicine man visiting the area, who informed them he had arrived to perform a kind of ritual in which he would ask the mountain to return the boy to his parents. And in one particularly unusual but wholesome incident, a barefoot man with a mule showed up on the trail and volunteered his services in the search effort. But as much as the gesture was a heartfelt one, dog teams and aircraft had failed to find any sign of Jard, so one more pair of eyes on the ground proved of little use. As much as it hurt them to do so, rescue volunteers were forced to call off their search entirely, and for years the case of little Jard's disappearance remained a complete and utter mystery. Cut to June of 2003, when hikers Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts were making their visit to the Big South Trail. Rob said, "We seen about the Powder Canyon as an area we'd like to explore, so we decided on getting there via the Big South Trail. We'd heard how gorgeous a hike it was, how beautiful and wild the area around the river was, and since that's the whole reason Gary and I got into hiking, we figured we'd pay it a visit." While on their hike, Rob and Gareth wound up in a rock field and decided to hike up around 2,000 feet to reach its top. Gareth later said, "It's remarkable country up there. It really was a scramble. You're constantly watching your feet. Focus on the area in front of you so you don't end up twisting an ankle or something." He and Rob had hiked areas in the vicinity before and were obviously aware of the Jard Atadero mystery, owing to the amount of media attention it received. And as experienced outdoorsmen, They had spent one or two occasions theorizing on the cause of the boy's disappearance. Rob said, "We'd figured he'd been swept downstream and be taken by a mountain lion. Obviously, there was the possibility of something more sinister happening, but it's something we didn't really talk about. Having kids of our own, it just didn't bear thinking about." But since they were hiking the exact area that Jard had gone missing, the pair felt an eerie sense of dread and couldn't keep their minds off the mysterious and heartbreaking incident. But neither must have expected the discovery they were due to make that day. Rob and Gareth usually stuck to popular hiking trails mainly for safety purposes, but on that first visit to the Big South Trail, with the thought of Jard's disappearance in their minds, they took it upon themselves to wander off the trail. Gareth added, "We didn't set out to find anything. We figured if a whole team of guys couldn't find anything, there was no way we could. But I guess there was an element of what if, you know. Then about an hour into the hike, we just walked right into it. I couldn't believe my eyes at first, but there they were, clear as day." Rob and Gareth had somehow stumbled across a set of child's clothes more than 500 feet off the trail from where he was last seen. Gareth said, "That's when I saw the shoe. It was a kid's shoe, definitely, and it was pristine, like somebody had just took their foot right out of it, you know. Fresh, like you might look up and see a kid hopping around looking for their sneaker." But then the two hiking buddies found another matching shoe, a brown fleece jacket, and a pair of blue sweatpants that had been turned inside out. In their eyes, there was no way these clothes could be Jard Atidero's. The boy had been missing almost 4 years by that time, and it wasn't conceivable that they could be exposed to the elements for all this time and still look brand new. But still, just in case, the two men took photographs of the clothes and called 911 at the next available opportunity. They complied with the detective's request to email over the photographs they'd taken, which were then forwarded to Alan Atidero, who was living in Littleton at the time. The detective was stunned when he received a reply stating that the clothes did indeed belong to Jard. Within 24 hours, state authorities had assembled a team consisting of Larimer County Sheriff's Office members, Larimer County search and rescue officials, rangers from the Colorado Division of Wildlife, and volunteers from an organization known as Necro Search. All were directed to meet at the Big South Trailhead to start the search for remains of Jard, later with Alan Atidero and personnel from the local Child Protection Network joining the search effort. They managed to recover the remains of the entire outfit that Jard was wearing on the day of his disappearance, which were scattered over a 25-foot area. While the cloth jacket had what appeared to be puncture marks and the pants were tattered, the nylon shoes had little weathering, leading investigators to conclude that some of the items were sheltered from the elements and some were exposed. It was the simplest explanation, but not necessarily the correct one. Then, about 180 feet north and 20 feet higher in elevation than the place the clothing was found, police made a chilling discovery. It was a tiny piece of a human being's skull wedged into a crevice and only barely visible with the naked eye. Nearby, on a log spanning the crevice where the skull fragment was found, police also found a human tooth. At 5 p.m. that evening, Alan Atidero and other members of the search teams summoned the throngs of TV news reporters to the trailhead and announced what he and the team had found. It was most definitely a breakthrough in the case, but again, the discovery only seemed to generate more questions than it answered, and it wasn't long before people were forced to come up with their own explanations. Canadian outdoorsman Les Stroud, survivorman, said that whatever is happening up on the Big South Trail is simply beyond human comprehension. In a lot of these cases, search and rescue, or the volunteers searching people have already gone over certain areas not once, not twice, but even dozens of times, he said. And then the child is found there maybe a year, it'll be a few years later. It makes no sense at all. I've been in and out in the woods for years now, and I've seen all kinds of things, but still, I can't make sense of it all. Rob Osborne says there's a good chance the area where Jard's clothes were found was searched during the initial effort, and that it was down to one simple thing. No way could a kid have climbed up to that spot on his own. No way. I mean, it was a struggle for Gary and I to get there. It was very rough terrain. So maybe the police should have searched that area the first time around. But at the same time, I can't blame them for ruling it out. Police dog handler Jane Schmievsky's conclusion from the get-go was that Jared's disappearance was due to an animal encounter. I'm not sure officially what has really been released as a finality, but it pretty much points to an animal encounter. Nothing else explains how he could have been dragged up so high, unless of course it was a person that took Jared that morning. This was where SAR specialist Bill Nelson's testimony gets a little frightening. If a big cat actually took him, which is what I believe happened, it would have taken him someplace and buried him, he said. With all the activity that was going on, we probably scared it away. Then it would have come back later to dig up its meal. That's why no one found nothing. The kid was underground the whole time. But then surely volunteers or police would have noticed some disturbed earth somewhere, and Jared's clothing must have showed some signs of animal attack. It's inconsistencies like those that make Alan Adadero think something else is to blame for his son's disappearance. I hear constantly about a mountain lion, he said. But when they tested Jared's clothes, there was no mountain lion hairs, no DNA, no blood, nothing on his clothes. The mountain lion would have attacked him. They would have gone for the stomach area. His jacket would have been threads, but his jacket was fine. I've talked to wildlife experts about this, Alan said, quick to reassure those who will listen. Jared's jacket would not have survived a mountain lion attack. His shoes that were found up in the mountain, as told by investigators, did not look like they were in the wilderness for years. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Alan also notes that the other thing interesting about the discovery of Jared's almost spotless shoes is that they would most definitely have been scuffed up if he had been dragged up the side of the mountain. In a mountain lion attack, his pants were found in good condition with only minor damage from rodents and birds using threads for nesting materials. A large predator would have had to tear through the small boy's clothing in order to feed, yet there's no signs that that was the case. One of the reports that Alan Adadero read says that the reason why the forensic examiners didn't find any DNA or blood on Jared's clothing is because either he or something removed his clothes before he was attacked. We can only imagine how horrified his father would have been reading that. It was the very last thing he wanted to hear. The report goes on to say that because there were so many hikers coming up, the mountain lion that took Alan's son then absconded with his body 500 feet up the side of the cliff. Yet the question remains, if something took Jared's clothing off before he was attacked, why was it then found around 500 feet off the mountainside? His pants were found inside out, a clear indication that they had been pulled off in a hurry and not by anything that had claws or teeth. And as we've said, it's little details like this that cause Alan and his family to believe that someone out there knows a little more about the case than they're comfortable sharing. Jared's disappearance has never been fully explained by either U.S. law enforcement or their amateur counterparts, but it's important for mountain lion theorists to keep this in mind. Since 1915, there have been a grand total of 14 reported mountain lion attacks in the U.S. and Canada that have resulted in fatality. The chances of being attacked by one are tremendously low, and even lower when you consider that Jared was part of a large group of hikers. These hikers were intensively questioned by the police, as it seemed natural that at least one of them would be held responsible for his disappearance. But multiple homicide detectives said interviews with hiking group members showed no obvious red flags, and that no evidence pointed toward their guilt. As a result of such speculation, theories seeking to explain such mysterious events have evolved from purely rational possibilities to bizarre conspiracy theory-like explanations, such as cryptid attacks or alien abduction. But as much as people keep throwing ideas at the wall, nothing is sticking, and as more and more time goes by, it looks more and more likely that the disappearance of young Jared Adadero will forever remain a heartbreaking but terrifying mystery. School lockdown, the bathroom stall. This took place 2 years ago, and I can still recall every moment in almost perfect detail. It was nearing the end of school. Everyone was on their way to their last period, which for me was history, a class that I not only wasn't good at, but I also disliked the teacher. And at that point, I honestly had no motivation of even showing up. So ultimately, I decided to ditch and hide out in one of the bathroom stalls located near the very back of the school. Almost no one went back there, so I figured no one would find out anyway. I was in the furthest back stall playing some game on my phone when the ear-deafening sound of the principal coming over the intercom made me jump. The principal announced, "Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights." It was a lockdown announcement, though I honestly didn't pay any attention considering they were all practice, and so I just continued to sit there in the stall and wait. But just then, all the lights to the building seemingly shut off all at once. The hum of the light faded along with the buzzing of the AC unit, which meant all the power to the school had been cut off. The bathroom had gone pitch black, and that's when I was actually starting to get worried. Power was never cut off during practice lockdown drills. I texted my friend asking him what was going on, and literally right away he answered back with a text saying, "Dude, where are you? It's a real lockdown. Everyone's asking where you are." I told him I was in the bathroom, and he responds saying I should hide. But where else could I go? I wasn't just gonna run out into the hallway to find a better spot, so ultimately I decided to stay and hide in the stall I was in. I turned my phone's brightness down and texted my friend again. I asked him what the reason was for the lockdown, and after 5 long minutes of waiting, he replied saying that apparently there was a kid armed with a knife banging on classroom doors and asking to be let in. Both my classroom and the bathroom I was in were on the same floor, so I turned off my phone and tried my best to see if I could hear anything. There were running footsteps, and that was shortly followed by the sound of the bathroom door opening. I was absolutely horrified at what I was hearing. Whoever entered walked towards the stall next to me, went inside, and shut the door. I held my breath for what seemed like forever. Then, to break the silence, in a shaky voice I said, "Who's in here?" It was silent for a second, and then I heard a voice reply with, "I'm just looking for a place to hide. I heard there was a lockdown over the speakers." That didn't really answer my question, but the guy sounded around my age, and so I decided to just let it go. We sat in silence for what seemed like forever when finally we got another announcement telling all students to exit the school in an orderly fashion through the front doors where cops would be waiting outside. I exited the stall but was surprised to see the guy next to me didn't. I asked him if he was coming, and he replied saying, Yeah man, just give me a couple minutes." I thought that was weird, but regardless I left the bathroom and started heading towards the front exit of the school. As I was walking, my phone went off. My friend had texted me. He said that apparently a kid who was maybe a couple years older than us tried to rob a nearby gas station at knife point. The guy actually stabbed a couple people, and when he was unsuccessful in getting any money, he ran to hide in our school to blend in as one of the students. But what horrified me the most was the last sentence. My friend said that the cops outside were saying that the kid was still inside and that he was hiding somewhere in the back of the school. Reading this changed my walk to the front doors into a full-on sprint. Right as I got outside, I frantically informed one of the police officers of what I had experienced. After they searched the bathroom, they found it was empty, but that the window inside was broken. The kid had broken and escaped through the window. Needless to say, for the next few school days I had gotten a lot of unwanted attention because of what I had experienced. As far as I know, the kid still hasn't been caught, and it's still just difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that I was unknowingly hiding in a stall right next to the guy I was trying to hide from. School lockdown, the first grade class. I somewhat recently got my first real job as a teacher at a public elementary school in a nearby neighborhood. It was the first school year I was teaching, and at this point it was only September. So needless to say, I was still learning the ropes. It was honestly pretty stressful. I teach a first grade class of around 20 kids, so you can imagine how chaotic it would get at times, especially with my lack of experience. I remember one day I was in the middle of assigning the kids a worksheet for spelling simple words when the principal's voice came over the school's loudspeaker and ordered a lockdown. Now, being a new teacher, I wasn't yet informed of when the school had practiced lockdown drills around the year. Therefore, I had no idea if this was a drill or not. But I knew either way I had to follow protocol. I turned off the room's lights, locked the doors and windows, and had the kids sit against the walls out of sight. I'd say maybe 5 minutes passed of complete silence when I could faintly start to hear doors being banged on down the hall. I could feel my heart start to race as the sounds got louder, as whoever was banging on the doors got closer. At this point, I still had no idea whether it was just the principal checking all the classroom locks or an actual intruder in the school. But my thoughts were interrupted by one of my students bursting out crying. It was too loud. There's no doubt whoever was outside would have been able to hear it. I could tell the banging outside stopped in response to the noise, shortly after followed by a single pair of footsteps walking up to the door. It was silent for a few seconds, but the silence was quickly broken by a male's voice yelling out, "Hey guys, I think there's kids in this one." And that confirmed this lockdown was real. More footsteps could be heard running up to the door, and that's when genuine attempts to break down the door were made by multiple people. At that point, not a single kid in the class wasn't crying or screaming in fear. I didn't know what to do. I was never trained for this kind of situation. And that's when 2 gunshots could be heard, but it didn't come from the intruders. Police were now inside the building. Right after the shots were fired, the intruders could be heard running down the hall. 30 minutes later, and we were given the all clear. It turns out the intruders were 3 local high school students. They were eventually caught, but when asked why they did it, they would say close to nothing. Although one of the kids claimed it was a bet, but personally I don't believe that for a second. No bet is worth going to court over and even possibly losing your freedom. I firmly believe they had much worse intentions. Although most likely traumatized, luckily no one was physically hurt. The shots that were fired by the police were claimed to have been warning shots and were aimed directly into the ground. It's been 2 years since this all happened, and I still teach first grade at the same school and even in the same classroom. And to this day, those bullet holes can still be seen in the school's hallway.